that last song reminds me of a situation that I knew about in Indiana, where there was a funeral and this group was asked to come and sing at the last minute. They were a group that sang sometimes at funerals, and they were asked at the last minute. They didn't know anything about the person who was being buried. In fact, they didn't even know his name. And they sang that particular song, and after singing over and over again, "There is no night there," they found out that the man's last name was Night. So sometimes it's good to get a little extra information before you're called into a situation like that. I've been there myself and a time or two, and I know that sometimes it's good to have some previous information. We have been traveling with Jesus in the month of August. So today I'm going to be doing the last lesson in a short series that I have been talking about traveling with Jesus. Jesus traveled on numerous roads while he was on this earth. I selected 4 of these different roads that Jesus traveled or appeared on or told about for this short series of lessons. Each of these roads represents something different in the life of a Christian or anyone who is seeking to follow Jesus and his commandments. Thus far, we have traveled 3 roads with Jesus. Our first lesson, we traveled the Damascus Road, and we discussed the events where Paul met Jesus on that road and where he was directed into the city of Damascus, where he was converted. So the Damascus Road represents the road of conversion. In our next lesson, we traveled the Emmaus Road. We traveled with Jesus and Cleopas and his fellow traveler as they walked along, where they shared together, fellowship together, and travel in study of the Scriptures and in eating together. So this road represents the road of fellowship. In our last lesson, we traveled with a priest and a Levite and a Good Samaritan on a road that Jesus told about. The Jericho Road represents the road of service. But today we will travel the final road with Jesus, the final road that he traveled actually here on this earth before his sacrificial death on the cross. The Calvary Road, which we will call the road of sacrifice. We simply cannot walk this road in the same way that Jesus did. Only he could carry the cross of redemption. We simply cannot do that. Jesus carried that cross willingly, and in John 10:15 he said, "I lay down my life for the sheep." In verse 17 he said, "For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one has taken it from me. I laid it down on my own initiative." So Jesus was not forced on the cross. He went to the cross willingly for us and suffered there for us. The Father gave Jesus the authority to do this. Jesus goes on to say, "I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father," in John 10 and verse 18, the last part of verse 18. So no one but Jesus can carry the cross of redemption. We have our own cross to carry. Just as Jesus commanded in Luke 14 and verse 27, he said, "Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple." So we are traveling that road in that sense, that we carry our own cross, and he said, "Come after me." We follow Jesus. It is a daily walk. In Luke 9:23 it says, "He was saying to them all, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." So this is a daily walk. It's not just once in a while. It's not just on the Lord's Day. It is every day of the week. But even after all the teaching that Jesus did, his disciples wanted to walk a different road. They wanted to walk the glory road. In this lesson, we will see how Jesus' disciples desired to walk that glory road and how they finally learned to walk this road of sacrifice. So I want us to look at these two roads in turn. First, I want us to look at the glory road. Jesus' apostles were looking for an earthly kingdom where they would reign with Jesus in glory and in honor. They were thinking all the time that they were following Jesus, that they were going to reign with him in this physical earthly kingdom. This is why Peter became so upset when Jesus began to tell him that he would suffer and be killed by the Jewish leaders. In Matthew 16 and verse 21 and 22, it says, "From that time, Jesus Christ began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and raised up on the third day. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, 'God forbid it, Lord, this will never happen to you.'" After all, Peter had just confessed him as the Christ, the Son of the living God, as the Messiah, the deliverer, the one who was going to come and save the Jewish people and lead them in victory over their enemies. As we read just a little earlier here in Matthew 16:13, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he began asking his disciples, saying, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, still others Jeremiah, one of the prophets." And he said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter, being his impetuous self, jumped on that, and he said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." He truly believed that, and it was true. And so he confessed it. And then just a little later, when Jesus says, "Well, I'm going to be killed by the Jewish leaders," he said, "Whoa, no, this is not going to happen." The mother of James and John sought places of honor on either side of Jesus. In Matthew 20 and verse 20, "Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. And he said to her, 'What do you wish?' And she said to him, 'Command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit on your right, one on your right and one on your left.'" So they wanted these two places of honor, and their mother was even enlisted in talking to Jesus about that. Now, the 10, when they heard about this, in verse 24, it says they became indignant with these two brothers. The other apostles were indignant because they had an argument going. In Luke 9:46, it says, "And an argument rose among them as to which one might be the greatest." So James and John's going to get a little edge here. He said, "Hey, can we sit on either side of you?" And the other said, "Wait a minute." They were vying for a position. And they were not happy that James and John had got first request there. In fact, a little later on, they wanted Jesus to settle this argument. In Matthew 18 and verse 1, it says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" In other words, "Hey, we'll let you settle this." This argument continued right up to the Passover supper that Jesus ate with his disciples. At that supper, Jesus revealed that one of his disciples would actually betray him. And I think this is an interesting conversation that takes place here after he reveals that. Note how the discussion goes in Luke 22, 23, and 24. It says, "And they began to discuss among themselves which one of them it might be who was going to do this thing." But in the same discussion, it says, "And there arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be the greatest." So this somehow even gets into this conversation. Now, Jesus kept trying to teach them the lesson of service and sacrifice, but they didn't seem to get it until the very end of his ministry and the beginning of their ministry. In a moment, we're going to go back and look at the lessons Jesus tried to teach them whenever we look at this road of sacrifice. I also want you to know that these lessons apply to you and me today. And so when we read these, and don't just look at it as, oh, well, this was a problem with them or with the apostles. It doesn't just apply to the apostles, it applies to us also. So as we all should be traveling the Calvary road, the road to sacrifice. So let's look a minute at this Calvary road, the road to sacrifice, and note first of all that Jesus traveled this road personally. During and after his 6 mock trials by the Jews and the Roman officials, in the process, Jesus was slapped, he was beaten, he was scourged, he was mocked, he was humiliated, he was insulted, he had a crown of thorns placed on his head, and they took a rod and beat it down on his head. And the Jewish leaders, along with the crowd they had stirred up also, by the end of this, all of these events, were standing screaming, "Let him be crucified." So he traveled this road in a very, very personal way. And whenever Pilate gave in, we find Jesus starting down the Calvary road, bearing his own cross. In John 19 and verse 17, it says, "They took Jesus therefore, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha." Now as we go back to Luke chapter 23, and we're going to begin in verse 24. It says, "Pilate pronounced sentence, and they demand that their demand be granted, that he be crucified. And he released the man they were asking for, who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, but he delivered Jesus to their will. And so they led him away. They laid hold of one Simon of Cyrene coming out of the country and placed on him the cross to carry behind Jesus." Now John reveals to us, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke doesn't tell us this, but John says he started out carrying his own cross. And you know, we have a song that says he fell beneath the load. I don't know exactly what happened, but that is the most likely thing that happened, was that he simply gave out and couldn't carry that cross. And this man is coming up, Simon of Cyrene, and they just grab him and they put him in place and put the cross on him to carry. And it says there were following him a great multitude of the people and of the women who were mounting and lamenting him. And Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, stop weeping for me and weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and the hills cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what will happen in the dry?" And these things exactly happened at the destruction of Jerusalem, just a few years after that. And it says 2 others who were criminals were being led away and put to death with him. And when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the one side and one on the right side, one on the left. And Jesus was saying, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they cast lots, dividing up his garments among themselves. And the people stood by looking on, and even the rulers were sneering at him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself, if this is the Christ of God, his chosen one. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming up to him and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. And now there was this inscription above him, This is the King of the Jews. And one of the criminals who was hanged there was hurling abuse at him, saying, Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other answered, rebuking him, said, Do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And he said to Jesus, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said, truly, I say to you today, you shall be with me in paradise. And it came about that the 6th hour, the darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. And the sun was obscured, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had happened, he began praising God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. And all the multitude who came together for this spectacle, which they had observed what had happened, when they observed what had happened, began to return, beating their breasts. And all of his acquaintances and the women who accompanied him from Galilee were standing at a distance, seeing these things. I've taken a minute and read to you the whole situation of Jesus there on the cross and the people and what they did around it. And so this road to Calvary is the best known and the most highly praised road that Jesus traveled, but not one so quickly followed. It is the road of sacrifice and of dedication and, if necessary, even death. This is what Jesus was trying to teach his apostles during their glory-seeking days. As we go back to Matthew 16, listen to what Jesus was trying to teach his apostles when this was going on. And listen to Jesus' answer to Peter whenever Peter rebuked him for saying that he should not suffer and die. In Matthew 16:23, he turned to Peter and he said, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your minds on God's interests, but on man's. And then he said to his disciples, If anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake shall find it. For what will a man be profited if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? And so he's saying, you need to be thinking about the most valuable thing you have, and that is your soul. You are thinking about the kingdom and the glory that you would share with me in that kingdom. But you need to be thinking about your soul first. Now listen to the answer Jesus gave James and John whenever they asked to sit on either side of him. In Matthew 20, verse 22 and 23, Jesus answered and said, You do not know what you're asking for. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink? And they said, We're able. And he said to them, My cup you shall drink, but to sit on my right and my left, this is not mine to give, but it is for those to whom it has been prepared from my Father. Notice his question. Are you able to drink the cup that I am going to drink? He was saying to them, you'll walk the Calvary road, all right. And you'll suffer and you'll die as a result of it. But it'll not be for position. It'll be because you chose to be a servant. James died at the hand of Herod. We're told about that in Acts 10. John was exiled after a long ministry on the island of Patmos, where Jesus used him to write the book of Revelation, which was to help a church that was going to literally, in that sense, walk the Calvary road. They were getting ready for about more than 200 years of off and on persecution, and sometimes extremely severe. So they were getting ready to walk the road of persecution and sacrifice, and Jesus used John to prepare the book of Revelation for them so that they would understand that this was the only road to victory, that you're going to be persecuted because you follow Jesus, and if you live as a result of that, you've been victorious, and if you die, you've been victorious, as long as you follow Jesus. And this is what the book of Revelation is all about. So how did Jesus settle the argument about who is the greatest whenever they came to him and began to ask him about that? Let's go back to Matthew 18 and the first 4 verses. The time the disciples came to Jesus saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a child to himself and set him before them, and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." And so he began to teach them humility, and they were still not getting it. So Jesus does something at the Last Supper, which they would understand later, and this would bring home to them what their position really should be. In John 13 and verse 3, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, rose from the supper, laid aside his garments, taking a towel, he girded himself, he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter and he said, and he said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" And Jesus answered and said to him, "What I do you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter." So he's saying, you still don't understand the servant concept. You still don't understand the sacrifice that has to be made. But you'll learn about that pretty soon. And then in verse 12, after he had finished, he said, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, wash your feet, you ought also to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I did to you." There are no positions of glory in the Lord's church. The apostles finally got it after their baptism in the Holy Spirit. They learned to walk the Calvary road, to bear whatever cross they were given to bear, to carry out the Lord's work on this earth. Listen to their attitude just a little later on, whenever they began to be persecuted by the Jews. In Acts 5 and verse 40, after the beginning of the church, it says, after calling the apostles in, they flogged them and ordered them to speak no more in the name of Jesus, and then released him. This was the Sanhedrin, the council of the Jews, that did this. So they went on their way from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they had been considered worthy to suffer shame for his name. And every day in the temple and from house to house, they kept right on teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. Look at that tremendous change in attitude from what they had been thinking before until what they had been thinking after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. After they had been brought up to date, so to speak, in the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and after the message of Jesus had been totally revealed to them. So you see, the position of elder and deacon and evangelist and teacher are not positions of glory. They are positions of service and sacrifice. And you know, there's some who even refuse to take those positions because of that very reason. Now, I didn't say they were not positions that should be respected. They certainly should be respected. I said they're not positions of how you get glory on this earth. Any glory that we get will have to come from God himself. So when we follow Jesus on the Calvary road, everything else becomes secondary. In opposition to material things, Jesus said it this way in Matthew 6:33. He says, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you." You'll be given what you need on this earth to survive. In opposition to family, when you have to choose, Jesus said he comes first in Matthew 10:37. He said, "He who loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me." And when people began to make excuses about not following him, Jesus made what seems like an extremely radical statement. In Luke 14:26, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." Jesus is not teaching hate here. because it would contradict what he taught in other places. In the context, he's simply saying this. He's saying, you cannot use your family for a reason for not following me. You cannot use your desire to travel the glory road as a reason for not following me. This is not an excuse. It will be of no benefit to you, and it will be of no benefit to your family. And so don't try using that as an excuse, because I come first, and because of that, it will be of great benefit not only to you, but to your family and to all those who come in contact with me if you truly follow me down these roads we've been talking about. In our lesson, we've traveled with Jesus on 4 different roads. The Damascus road, the road to salvation. The Emmaus road, the road of fellowship. The Jericho road, the road of service. And the Calvary road, which is the road to sacrifice. So the question remains, have you chosen to walk these roads with Jesus? Jesus walked the Calvary road so that you could have eternal life. Have you walked the Damascus road? Have you taken advantage of the grace of Christ and the sacrifice that he made? Submitted your life to him in obedience to the gospel? You know, we don't live in a country where we suffer severe persecution for being Christians. But it's easy to allow family and friends and possessions and many other things to come between us and Christ. And Jesus is saying, I come first. And he's saying the glory, Paul wrote, the glory that many seek here can only be found in eternity, actually. That glory is far greater than anything that could be found on this earth. Suffering or glory, either one. In Romans 8 and verse 18, Paul wrote, For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed in us. So you're saying, why should I walk the Calvary road? Why should I walk a road of sacrifice? Why should I walk a road that will cost me? And he's saying, no matter what it costs you, whether it's great or small, there is no comparison to what will be revealed whenever you come and walk with Jesus in his glory in eternity. There's no comparison in any way. So if you want to walk the streets of gold in the eternal city, you have to walk with Jesus while you're here on this earth. So how are you doing on these roads? Have you started at all? Have you got sidetracked somewhere along the way? Are you on the straight and narrow that leads to life? Are you on the broad road that leads to destruction? You know, there's only 2 roads in a spiritual sense that we can travel that way. We're on either one or the other. And we ought to be on the straight and the narrow that Jesus talked about. And as fellow travelers, our purpose is to help one another on that road, to encourage and help one another in times of need and in times whenever we need encouragement. Maybe whether it's physical or spiritual, we need to help each other along on that road. So as fellow travelers, let's continue to do that. And we sing an invitation song at the end of our lessons for that very purpose. And people haven't started yet, so they can obey the gospel and get started on that traveling. And if they've got sidetracked and maybe need prayers or something that we can help with, so we can do that. Or whether just need to join us and get going with us, then do that also. So whatever your need may be, if we can help you in any way, why not come while we stand and sing at this point in time.